Let's play Planck's game by continuously dividing a line into two halves. Eventually it can get shorter than two dots, because dividing it again would cause it to vanish. That is because a line can't consist of a single dot. This means that the universe began in time with one single dot, and then with the next dot it became a line, and with the third dot it became a two-dimensional plane, Planck area. And when the quarks and protons were formed, the two-dimensional Planck area had to take a new point in space to become Planck space. And with this fourth point, the two-dimensional Planck area evolved to become the third-dimensional Planck space, which gave way to the formation of quarks and protons. That's why there must have been an initial instance in which time started. It was followed by a second instance in which space was formed in its four stages: a point, a line, a plane, and a three-dimensional space. Then existence became materialistic, and space was formed. And until then, existence was null for less than a second according to the estimation of scholars, because there was no substance in this era. The Bubble's theory predicts that in the void existence era, there was only one compound raw energy, or more accurately, undifferentiated primitive energy. And the great quark's explosion is nothing but the end of an existence and the beginning of another. Some say that this raw energy is strings that later synthesized and matured during the void existence era, from which the four known types of energy emanated to create the ideal conditions to transition to the matter era and its expansion, the era of time and no space. This era lasts less than a second and begins from the moment the previous space ends. That is when all of its matter turns into energy. We call it the era of super energy strings. This era ends after 1 second, when the strings begin to form the new space. In this first second, the bubble theory talks about two eras, the string era and the bubbles era. The super energy strings emanating from the previous cosmic matter are still unknown, and we don't truly know their nature, but we fully know the four cosmic energy forms which emanated from the strings. Scientists believe that the graviton was formed within a period between 10 to the power of minus 43 and 10 to the power of minus 36 of the first second, and the Gilliam was formed in the period between 10 to the power of minus 36 and 10 to the power of minus 12 of the first second. And finally, the bosons and magnons formed between 10 to the power of minus 12 and 10 to the power of minus 6 of the first second. Which allowed the emergence of particles to begin the matter era. That's why we call these quantities of energy which formed from the strings of the primary energy the name bubbles. Because these quantities of energy are of zero mass, Einstein's energy equation is deemed useless. The Bubble's theory differs even in terms of nomenclature, as the word particles doesn't work well in describing these independent quantities of energy, because it means that it is physical and that it occupies space and has mass and weight, and the calculation of its energy obeys Einstein's E=mc² law, and this is a major mistake. A bubble has no weight nor mass, and it doesn't occupy space. That's why in the first second we don't need space, and there is no need to justify its existence. Space and time are not two sides of the same coin, and space-time is nothing but an inaccurate expression of the relationship between them. The reason we are using the space-time theory is because the quantum scientists haven't been able to prove the existence of graviton in order to refute this myth. So the enthusiastic experimental physicists rush to convince people with this theory, which without gravity underneath doesn't work. And so after all their effort, they ended up explaining gravity with gravity. After the primary strings successfully formed the four primary energy bubbles, primary means that they don't accept other types of bubbles within them. Secondary bubbles capable of containing other bubbles have started to form, and all of this happened before the end of this second. In the bubbles theory, we classify two types of bubbles, primary and secondary. Primary bubbles are unable to contain other bubbles, and they represent the four energies. First, the Graviton Bubble, which is the most important, largest, and most numerous bubble, and it's responsible for the formation of place. Its importance comes from its ability to give the secondary bubbles mass, weight, and volume so that their existence becomes physical to occupy space, meaning to form the place. Second, the Gilliam Bubble formed after the Graviton. It does not form matter, but it is very necessary for its development. Were it not for this bubble, we would only have had hydrogen in this universe. Third, the Magnum Bubble, or the Charge Bubble, which is the dynamic energy generation bubble in this universe, whether it's magnetic, electric, or light. Fourth, the Boson Bubble, which is responsible for the stability of matter, and it strengthens its resistance to annihilation. Strings are the basis for the formation of all bubbles. After the formation of the four primary energy bubbles, the strings form the materialistic secondary bubbles, which allow the energy bubbles to reside in them. Secondary bubbles are divided into selective bubbles, which choose a specific bubble to inhibit, and non-selective bubbles that welcome all types of bubbles. The selective bubble is semi-materialistic. It did not acquire all the properties of matter due to its failure to accept all the four elementary energy bubbles. Its percentage in the universe is more than 90% of it, and they exaggeratedly called it the black matter. It has no weight, cannot be seen, and has no mass, but we believe it only receives the Magnum Bubble, and this provides it with the charge. They are placed according to the randomness of their charges with different densities that can't be studied but are known, because they are positioned opposite to the rest of the components of the universe. In other words, everything in the universe is placed in the spaces specially left for by the black matter. The secondary bubble is non-selective, and it has two types, a free type that accepts any bubble inside it. Like an electron bubble, it accepts inside it the Graviton and the Magnum bubbles while remaining free. And non-free bubbles, like the quark bubble, which can receive graviton, magnons, and bosons, and remain grouped in triple groups to form the proton and neutron. Some scientists insist that the nuclei were formed before the end of the first second of the formation of the universe, and the electrons were formed before the end of the third minute. Protons and neutrons receive the quarks and inhibit the nucleus. The nucleus is a free secondary bubble, like an electron that accepts materialistic bubbles such as a proton and neutron, as well as primary energy bubbles, and these are Gillian. Then, until the year 380,000, the nuclei were able to have an electron in orbits around them, so ionization began, and the electron jumping and fractionalization began. Based on this, the particles of matter were formed at the end of the first second, and in succession, they produced the primitive atom, starting from the 20th minute, along with the emission of light waves and the ejection of photon bubbles. This is the period in which the material particles appeared and occupied space and formed place. That is, the cosmic background rays that we study and analyze do not tell us anything about what happened in the first 380,000 years of the life of the universe, because atoms, despite the availability of their particles, were not functionally mature in order for their electrons to fractionalize and form wave frequencies and photons.